Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 326 of the Board Game Barrage podcast. We are continuing the top 50, and specifically my top 50, the best top 50, kind of the definitive top 50. Some people say. I mean, you know, not going to speak for everyone, but I've heard people say that. That's the word on the street, that this is the one that I think defines the taste of the community, as it were.
I've heard one person
and by
say
the
that.
Community, I mean the board gaming world.
I've heard one person say that, and by that I mean you.
That is not true. Let's just get right into it. We will be resuming from a couple of weeks ago, jumping right in at number 30. My number 30th favorite game, that will never not be awkward to say. My 30th favorite game of all time is down 8 spots, is Gloomhaven. I think that this is very indicative of a problem that we've brought up again and again, which is what you do with a game when you know you're never going to play it again. Gloomhaven will always be an important game in my board gaming history. I adored it. It's kind of a role-playing game in a box, a dungeon crawling game in a box. I played a ton of Gloomhaven, played out the campaign. This is also, I would say, definitely also a function of the fact that I'm not particularly enjoying Frosthaven. This is the sequel to Gloomhaven, and it is not hitting as hard as Gloomhaven did for us. In fact, we are probably going to be abandoning our campaign of Frosthaven.
What?
Yeah.
You can't do that.
No, you can't, apparently, but like, we're going to
never
try.
quit a campaign game.
Yes, exactly. Not something you'd ever do, Khaled.
Yes.
But yeah, I think that's kind of left a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth when I think about Gloomhaven a little bit, which is a bit of a bummer. It doesn't deserve that. But regardless, it's probably going to be slipping off of the list. It can't stay there forever. Gloomhaven, you know, it wouldn't be on this list if I still didn't think it was an excellent experience. It's still one I would recommend to anyone. It's my definitive dungeon crawl cooperative campaign experience. You know, there have been other contenders, stuff like Oathsworn that has come up recently. I still think Gloomhaven is the one to beat, and it's hard to argue with how accessible it now is in the form of Jaws of the Lion. If you've ever been Gloomhaven curious, go somewhere that you can buy Jaws of the Lion and play that out. The way that it tutorializes Gloomhaven, I think, is brilliant. Highly recommend Gloomhaven. Fantastic game that will just unfortunately continue to slide down my list, I think.
A one and done, as they say.
Well, a like 55 and done.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you consider 100 odd scenarios of a game, yeah. 29th favorite game is a new entry. I think it is going to be the highest new entry. This is War Story Occupied France.
Wow, wait, you're speaking my language. Is this a war game?
I don't know. I'm very curious. This is one I think I'm very excited to get your take on in particular, Mark, because, if the title doesn't give it away, this is a historic game. I do want to caveat a lot of things here at the front.
Yeah, I want a lot of caveats, Neilan.
Yeah, let's start with a caveat. This is effectively a solo game. Like, you can play this cooperatively, but it is in the vein of Consulting Detective, which is to say that you're communally making decisions. So, like, if you are playing this in a group, just know that you are just effectively agreeing on what to do next. It is, in fact, by one of the designers of the later editions of Consulting Detective, and a designer I like a lot, David Thompson, who you may be more familiar with the Undaunted series of games. This is not like Undaunted in any sense. In fact, the thing that surprises me about this game in general is the fact that it's a World War II game means I kind of love it despite its theme. It is, for all intents and purposes, a complicated choose-your-own-adventure game. But it is one of the best examples of that I have ever seen. In fact, I mean, it straight up is. Like, I have played a lot of games like Consulting Detective or other games where you're sort of just working your way through a story, either solo or communally. This is straight up the best one of them I've ever played. This is my favorite solo game I think I've ever played. I really enjoyed this. It is structured in this release as a 3-scenario campaign, but one that really lends itself to repeat plays. If you are video game adjacent, the Telltale games are going to be the best analogy for this. It's a game where your choices really do matter. It's a game where very small incidents lead to compounding effects, and the narrative unfolds and changes as a result of that. I was incredibly surprised by how well structured this is, how well, maybe not well written is the right word, but the way that the story both feels surprising in its revelations, but also in a way that you can kind of trace back every action that happens to a choice that you made earlier in the game. And sometimes even to choices that you made like earlier in the campaign to some extent. It's just a really neat production. I must have taken a lot of time and effort to sort of construct the way that they've done this. And it's one that I'm very excited to revisit, to like try other options and work my way through the narrative in different ways. I think this is super unique. I'm very excited for them to do a lot more of this, hopefully with different themes. That would be my only knock against it, but really, really smitten by war story occupied France.
What do you have against World War II?
It's just dull. It's just dull. To some extent, like, it's a theme that I've just seen done so many times, both in video game land and in, board game land. It just is something that doesn't have...
bro.
yeah, sorry, deriding a whole epic historical event by saying, boring theme. But it's just something that has no appeal to me. Mark, I think that if you can get past the fact that this is not a mechanically dense game, that it's really just one about simple choices, I think that you would really enjoy this. And I definitely encourage you to check it out for sure.
I really, really, really wanted to enjoy Consulting Detective, and so you saying that this is sort of like Consulting Detective, but like with more coherent story. One of my knocks about Consulting Detective is, aside from the fact that I don't think it really works well as like a multiplayer game, and to hear you play this solo is something that is encouraging to me. But one issue I had is like sometimes it doesn't feel very coherent. It feels like the Sherlock Holmes character, who's like sort of like the answer at the back of the book, takes leaps of logic, don't really make sense. And the way you're describing this feels like that is avoided in this game, like things make sense.
Well, it's not a deduction game in the same way. It's more about sort of it's all about working your way through choices more than it is about like solving something to some extent. But it does have those really cool moments of like, sometimes it's like, do you want to send... Because it has like role-playing elements where you have characters with the different stats and be like, okay, which character are you going to send down this choice? How are you going to allocate your agents between each of these different sort of options? And when you nail that, you feel really smart for having done it in the way that you think that the game is trying to get you to solve a problem. So it has moments like that feel like, man, I just crushed it. I kind of figured I knew where this was going, and I sort of nailed it. And it feels good.
I've already added it to my wish list. So I'm definitely excited to give it a shot. Yeah.
My 28th favorite game of all time is in the exact same spot as it was last year. This is Gaia Project. In all honesty, I have not played this since last year. So this is just one of those things where it is just living and dying on like my expectation of, I played a lot of Gaia Project. I know where it kind of sits in the pantheon of games I have to play. I'm always excited to play this. This is my preferred flavor of Terra Mystica, all of those games. The other caveat I will sort of add to this is I've not played Age of Innovation yet. I am currently in progress on a BGA game, so I didn't think it was fair to even consider it for this spot. I suspect I will end up liking that more just because of the ways it kind of folds together some of the systems of Terra Mystica and Gaia Project. But for right now, Gaia Project is still my favorite in this heavy Euro engine building, area control type realm. The addition of the tech trees on Terra Mystica in particular is a thing that really elevates Gaia Project above Terra Mystica for me personally.
Thought you'd be innovating by now in a new age.
Yeah, it is actually really surprising I've not played this yet. For as much as I love Gaia Project and Terra Mystica, like I really am surprised I never got around to playing this just yet. Like it's one that had been sort of hot in my anticipation list for so long, but the thing that keeps coming up is games like this are really hard to get to the table because of their weight, because of like having enough people that are like interested in buying into it. I've had opportunities to play it at game nights, and I will be honest, I've turned it down just because I've not often been in the mood to learn that heavy of a game, because as familiar as I am with the games, there would still be stuff to learn in terms of the changes for this, and it's also a long brain burny game. But I really want to make that happen this year because I've only heard incredible things about Age of Innovation for sure.
One of my biggest regrets / blind spots in board gaming, I mentioned this before, is the whole Terra Mystica Gaia Project thing. I just played all of them at least a couple times, and they've never really stuck, and I just feel like that's a personal failing of mine. Like for some reason, I just feel like I should enjoy them more. I wonder if Age of Innovation is maybe my path into. I don't know, but it's just a whole family of games I have to try to get more into, I think.
Yeah, I think you should try Age of Innovation based on what I understand about it. I think of the two, Terra Mystica and Gaia Project, Terra Mystica would probably be more your flavor because there's just much more of that very direct land control interaction. Gaia Project kind of like abstracts that a little bit more. But, that's a returning feature of Age of Innovation that I think you would really enjoy. I'm surprised that Terra Mystica didn't like stick with you.
Yeah,
it does seem like a very, very marked game for sure.
Should try it again.
My 27th game has also gone up a big jump like Mark's did last week. Ark Nova, up 14 spots.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Like it.
And kind of for the same reasons, playing it a lot on Board Game Arena. As much as I love playing Ark Nova in person, I think jumping to Board Game Arena sort of just opened to me be able to play it a lot more regularly, and just really kind of blew the doors wide open on like appreciating how diverse the different strategic options you have available are. I feel like I'm trying to make a point every time I play Ark Nova to just tell myself I'm going to hyper focus on this action, whether it's like animals or cards or this sort of thing. And there are viable ways to make every single one of those paths work really, really well. To the point that it's actually in the first few games, I remember it being a really hard decision because all the buffed versions of those action cards feel incredibly powerful, but they are all not equally maybe, but they are all viable in different ways. And I love that the play space allows you to explore each of those options. One thing I think that's quite neat about Ark Nova, especially as regards to all of those card actions go, is you will never be able to upgrade all 5. So you're always choosing one that you sort of have to do without. And that is always a really, really hard decision for me.
All right.
It's
but Neilan, of the 5 cards, which is the one that you don't upgrade?
There is actually, I mean, legitimately, there's not one that I will never upgrade.
No, sure, but yeah, everybody has their,
everyone has the one. Gosh, I don't know. I think weirdly enough, I think Animals is the one I do the least frequently.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
For me, it's Sponsors. Sponsors is the one that.
Oh yeah, Sponsors is. Funny, like the sponsor cards are the ones that I tend to gravitate towards the most. Funny enough, so
this is great though.
I don't think that's my cards is always a favorite. Like I think cards is always one that comes early, but yeah. It never ends up like really relying on like the big animals. I think playing animals directly from the card row is super powerful, which is great. But we're just nerding out about Ark Nova at this point. Sorry, Khaled.
Yay, animals.
Number 26 on my list is up 5 spots. This is another one that kind of surprised me because I don't just tend to like throw the list out into the ether, but I end up moving the games up and down a whole lot. And I just ended up settling with Kemet at this spot, despite the fact that I haven't played it in over a year at least. But this is maybe just in response to the fact that I want to be playing more Kemet. Like it is still one of the games that just sits in my mind as like a definitive dudes on the map experience for me. It's absolutely one of my favorites in the genre. It is a really, really neat game about building your own technology, not really a tech tree per se, but like defining the actions and the abilities and the monsters that are going to define your play. And you do that in a way that feels very organic from game to game to game. Am I going to go hard down the red path? Am I going to go hard down the resource gathering path with the white tiles, or defensive with the blue tiles? And I think that the way that the game allows you to both sort of commit to a lane, kind of what I was talking about with Ark Nova, but then also adjust and pivot based on what other players are doing. And the fact that it marries that with just bringing out big, splashy, cool monsters out onto the board is just super, super cool. The card system is one that I think has just been often imitated. The very simple card play that determines how battles play out. The trade-offs between whether you're going to go for victory or casualties in a battle. I really, really enjoy that. Yeah, really a big fan of Kemet and definitely want to play more of it.
I haven't played Kemet in too long. Yeah, it's just been quite a while. And hearing you talk about it has got me itching to get it back on the table for sure.
Which power tiles do you like better? The white power tiles or the black power tiles?
Red. I'm going to go red.
Yeah, that's right. I'll go blue.
I think that this one is just it's almost like my dislike or non-interest, let's call it, in Kemet, probably prevents you from playing it more just because we would be the crew that you would be Kemeting with. And so like with Christina, I'm just like, you don't want to play Kemet, right? Don't listen to Neilan. We want to play Inish. We want to play Cthulhu Wars.
At some point, I just need to like trick you into playing it again because it is pretty good at 3 players. So, yeah, we should just get a game with Christina going.
Well, yeah, I love teleporting around the map where nothing I do matters.
My 25th favorite game of all time is up one spot. This is something we were talking about last episode. This is Yellow and Yangtze. This is my preferred flavor of Tigris and Euphrates. I've kind of mentioned this before, but specifically I think that the way that Tigris and Euphrates, the board state can be extremely fragile. And that's by design. Like cities sort of rise up and then they crumble just as instantly. Yellow and Yangtze sort of builds in a little bit more stability to it and sort of bolts on a few more systems that I kind of agree with a little bit more in terms of how they're implemented. But at the same time, the core of the game is still largely the same. The changes, I would say, between the two are subtle. I think most people would argue that Tigris and Euphrates would be the superior version. I just happen to like the specific things that Yellow and Yangtze sort of subtly pivots the game towards. Those are just close to things that I sort of enjoy about this game. This is, I think, probably is it the first Knizia? No, Cascadero was lower down. But a Rhine and Knizia game, there would definitely be more of those towards the top. Yellow and Yangtze.
For what it's worth, although Yellow and Yangtze isn't on my list and Tigris is, I might actually play Yellow more because I just think it's easier to get to the table. It's not as quote-unquote rough and therefore more welcoming to players. So yeah, I very much enjoy this as well.
Yeah, and there's something to be said for that, because I will definitely reserve the right to be like a hypocrite about this later when it comes to some of the games higher up on my list, but I do think that there is just something to be said for a game that is slightly easier to get to the table.
Sure,
slightly easier to introduce people to. And if it is giving you 80% of the same flavor, that's largely what I'm going to lead towards most of the time.
Yeah, I agree.
You haven't played the newest one, though, right? I don't know how to say it.
I have not, but that is just a graphical retheme, right?
I don't know. I haven't played it. Has its own BGG entry.
Oh, there we go.
I think there might be some small change to it, but I have no idea. It's definitely more Yellow and Yangtze than,
Yeah, no, I think it's like at least 90% Yellow and Yangtze if there are any changes, which I need to look into actually. That is Huang, what we're talking about, by the way. My 24th favorite game on the list is up 5 spots, and this is going to be, I think, one of my little cheats, which Kellen loves, this is Undaunted, but in particular, I will say Undaunted Stalingrad, but this is definitely boosted a little bit by me having played Undaunted 2200 this year, mostly, so it's my encapsulation of all the Undaunted games, but it is specifically Undaunted Stalingrad, which is the one that I would say is the definitive Undaunted experience. Even though that is quite a daunting, pun not intended, way to like enter the series, I think that is the best. The way that it rolls in a narrative and stakes, because the casualties you have from one game roll into each subsequent game, is really quite incredible. Like, you can get to the point where all of your snipers are dead at some point later in the game. You just don't have access to them come a scenario where they would have been very, very critical. And those consequences, like similar to what I was talking about with War Story, which, you know, you can kind of see the lessons that Dave Thompson learned probably from designing Stalingrad, the way that those consequences play out in subsequent games is just so powerful to me. And you marry that with a game that kind of preserves a lot of what I love about wargaming, a genre that I've not really engaged with since I was young. Undaunted is just a really good distillation of those mechanics mixed with a really solid deck building core. Undaunted is equal parts on a strategic level. You have to be good at deck building and you have to be good at tactical unit placement. And the fact that it marries those two systems so well together is incredible.
You also have to be good at rolling dice.
Yes, exactly. You do.
It's my favorite skill in Undaunted.
I think I would like this. The only issue for me is that I play 2-player games so infrequently that it's hard to get to the table, but I definitely want to try to play this series of games. I've only played the original Undaunted and have the other ones, just haven't played them, but I'm sure I would like them.
I'll tell you what, Mark, Undaunted 2200 has a 4-player mode. 2v2. Yeah, okay. I think honestly that if that is actually a legitimate like bonus to you, that I would consider picking it up.
Yeah.
Because I will say for most people, I would actually recommend that 2200 is a good entry point. And particularly for me, I like the theme, the sci-fi theme. I would love to see the campaign game. You know, 2200 technically has a campaign, but not in the same legacy style way that Stalingrad does.
Right.
And I would love to see them give that treatment to 2200, because then I think it would easily just catapult above Stalingrad for me personally.
Yeah, that's great.
Definitely recommend
because
that.
The 2-player aspect is the biggest stumbling block by far. So here there's a 4-player version that makes it much more accessible to me, at least. So that's great.
My 23rd favorite game, talking about 2-player games, this is War of the Ring 2nd Edition. I love Lord of the Rings as a story, as a work of fiction. It's been kind of like a long time favorite of mine. And I think that if you needed a purer, maybe for a given value of pure, depending how would you define it, a purer version of Lord of the Rings in a box, it is War of the Ring. It is a combination of kind of the sort of small scale story of a small squad of people, the Fellowship, getting across from one side of the world to the other while being chased by the dark forces of Sauron, intermixed with a war game that's kind of playing out at the same time. You're effectively playing 2 games on top of each other at the same board, and the way that those games intersect with each other is kind of the heart of what makes War of the Ring really, really solid. You cannot neglect one side over the other. The thing I think is quite smart about the design of the game is one of those games, in particular the war game, is pitched in favor of Sauron, and the Journey of the Ring game is kind of pitched in favor of the Fellowship. So there's a way that you sort of have to lean strongly towards one objective over the other, but you cannot neglect one. It is very often that Fellowship will be able to win, for example, the war game, if you're just neglecting it and sort of relying too heavily or pushing too hard in one direction. But on top of that is layered this very intricate system of cards that have a reliance on very specific story beats and characters in the right places, and a fair amount of what I think some people would consider if you're not familiar with the story of the games. But every time one of those events comes up, or my forces get swallowed because they happen to be in Fangorn Forest at the wrong time, it's just exemplary of the kind of the big high thematic highs that this game has. And over the course of multiple games, you kind of learn those traps, you learn those pitfalls, and you sort of try and find ways to circumvent them and work around them.
Neil,
yes.
Let me ask you this.
Yes.
Is it canonical to the new masterpiece, The Lord of the Rings, The War of Rohirrim? Because I really would want it to be if I was going to invest my time in
totally, yes. Does it
game.
Bring in the anime, the recent anime?
Yes.
We can only hope that there will be an expansion down the line.
Yes.
Totally, yeah.
That's what you're
at that
hoping
point,
for.
Kellen, then truly it will be the best Lord of the Rings experience.
All right, Until then, probably.
Yeah. It's always going to fall a little bit short.
Thank you, Neilan.
Yeah. Thank you for representing the Tolkien side of the family.
Yeah.
Because I think the purists in particular are wanting the anime Rohirrim version of.
I may have mispronounced a word in that title, but who's counting?
That is War of the Ring 2nd Edition at 23. My 22nd favorite game of all time is down 6 spots. This is Gods of Atlantis II. Kind of similar to Gloomhaven. Not that I don't think I will ever play Gods of Atlantis 2 ever again, but I played a lot of Gods of Atlantis 2 in the lead up to the release of this game to kind of a alarming degree. And that sort of desire to play it just didn't persist over the long course of time for me. Having sort of been such a massive fan of the original game and Gods of Atlantis 2, which I still think is such an excellent distillation of MOBA style mechanics in a board game, I just haven't found that I've been returning to it as much as I used to in the last couple of years. So it's just slipped down the list a little bit for me, but still just an excellent team game. A game that is sort of I would not going to say devoid of luck, because there is simultaneous play, and a lot of the time that is effectively luck, but it is a very deterministic game where you're sort of managing the cards of your hero, the way that combines with the other heroes on your team in what kind of amounts to sort of almost like a sports game adjacent type of system of characters moving around the map and intersections and playing cards at exactly the right time in order to counter moves that the other team are doing. Really great game, really tense. I still think games of this sometimes maybe go slightly longer than they should, especially if you're playing with newer players, but really adore Gods of Atlantis 2.
Yeah, it strikes me in the couple times I've played it as very sports adjacent, and really give me that team versus team feeling where you're really trying to synergize with your teammates to succeed. A game that I wish I could play more regularly, because every time I play it, I feel like I'm getting a little bit better and seeing things I didn't see the last time I played it. And it feels like a game that you could really master, get better at, and feel like each time you played it, you gained a little bit more and you saw a little bit more than you did the time before. So yeah, really appreciated every play of this game that I've had so far.
Yeah, there are like very few things that like beat the highs of like coordinating something with a teammate in this and just having that pay off. Really, really excellent moments.
It does feel like if we only owned 20 board games, that a game like this would be one you would want to have, and it would just sort of become a like once a month, I'm going to get you back for that time you got me last month kind of game.
Absolutely. And that was where I had the most fun with it. The period of time where I was just playing this online consistently with the same group of players and just like watching that evolution of play over the course of time, that will be an experience that will be sort of hard to recapture if I were to revisit, because you would just need to play it repetitively with the same group of people, and that's becoming increasingly hard to do. My 21st favorite game is the Quest for El Dorado. This is up 2 spots. Another Reiner Knizia game. This is sort of like throwback to like something I was saying earlier. Like, I just love the accessibility of this game in general. Like, I think this is a game that is such a great combination of both incredibly easy to teach, a really solid introduction to what I love about deck building, but also one that I'm sort of always finding myself, especially with all of the expansions. I will say at this point that a lot of this is also riding high off of having acquired the Vincent Dutray art version of this that has all the expansions, and just sort of messing with those and kind of finding a lot of just like new inroads, like fun modifications to the base game of Quest for El Dorado. It's just a delight. For how simple it is just always a joy to play. I think the fact that it is a race game does a lot to like just allow people to like have very easy inroads. Like, there is nothing that could be simpler than get to this spot before anyone else. Like, that as your lead into any game, it's always a joy to like watch people's like faces light up as they sort of like see like how they're able to like manipulate cards to like navigate themselves around the board. And when you pull off clever moves, because it is ultimately a game about clever route navigation and sort of press your luck elements to some extent, and when those moves pay off, it's just really, really fun.
Like Taj Mahal, this is a game that I appreciate and I always enjoy playing, but for whatever reason has not necessarily hooked me, although I can see all the great parts to it. But I love the way that it integrates the race aspect with the deck building. Very, very clever.
Okay, my 20th favorite game is Hansa Teutonica. This is up 1 spot from last year. Hansa Teutonica is a game that, you know, we spoke about this a few weeks ago when it came up on Mark's list. I definitely appreciate something I've said earlier this episode as well, like how many different viable routes there are to pursue in this game. Kind of what we were saying about Ark Nova like also applies here. There are multiple ways that you can upgrade your action board, and all of those ways feel important and also feel devastating when you miss out on them. Like, if you don't get your action count up high, that's awful. If you don't get your end of game key scoring high, that's awful. If you don't get access to those sort of circle discs, which also give you access to like the, what we call the helicopter move, the teleport around the board move, all of that stuff feels essential and stuff that you have to get, but you can't get it all, because if you're focusing your time on upgrading all your actions, you're not getting onto the board, you're not building routes. Hansa Teutonica wants you to sort of grapple with like all of these things at the same time, and I sort of find that just really incredible to engage with. One of the things I mentioned a couple of episodes ago that I would definitely agree with Mark on, that sometimes the openings of Hansa can feel a little bit stale, but once you get out of that sort of introductory phase, once you get onto like the real meat of like interacting on the board, it just becomes one of my favorite interactive games, like pure interaction. Like, it is a game about blocking other players and intersecting other players and anticipating the moves of other players at every single turn. And there are kind of very few games that kind of really nail that. But all of those things, like both the wide paths to victory you have while being as interactive as this is. There are very, very few games that do it as well as Hansa Teutonica does.
Yep, totally agree.
Okay, my 19th favorite game on the list is, this is the other cheat, this is the Exit entry. This is the ever-growing...
You've been cheating the whole time, Neilan. Let's not
pretty much
say that it's just happening now.
The ever-growing entry that encompasses every Exit game that has ever been made and ever will be made. It's just, this would be an impossible thing to include on my list otherwise. Like, I love these games. I do think that it's down a couple of spots just by virtue of the fact that there have now been so many of these that you're starting to see them reuse puzzles to some extent. But one of the absolute highlights of my year is every year the Advent Calendar rolls around. They do this every holiday season. A series of 24 puzzles that play out in a giant box, all building towards and on top of each other towards a bigger puzzle towards the end of the month. And it's just one of my absolute joys, like a fun little puzzle to sort of solve every single day of December. And the way that they have continued to find ways to be inventive with their puzzle design is one of the highlights of the entire series to me. Their box products are still excellent. If you've not played any of these, there are now probably 100 of them to choose from. They're not all of equal quality, which is probably my biggest knock against the series, is like, they are really, really good ones and kind of really, really bad ones. And unless you know which ones are which, it can sometimes be hard to like divulge which those are. But on the whole, I just continue to adore these games and everything that they offer to like the puzzle escape room genre.
Do you buy them every year, like all the new ones?
I don't buy every entry anymore of the small box ones. So the one thing that they do that's kind of fun is they sort of experiment with different ideas. So this is a few years old at this point, but they had like jigsaw puzzle versions of them that were kind of integrating puzzles like into the jigsaws in interesting ways, which I thought was cute. They had a video game version that came out last year that wasn't amazing, but they're experimenting with like different forms in different ways. Every time there's sort of a new form factor comes out for it, I try those out. But yeah, I actually, if I'm being honest, I kind of have a backlog of the small box games that I own that I need to get through. But yeah, I do pick up the calendars every year and have a blast with those for sure.
I need to pick up the advent calendars. That seems so fun.
Yeah, you should. That's I will. Let me just keep talking about this a little bit. Yeah, exactly. January, the perfect time to be thinking about it. No, I just really quick, I will mention this because this is the reason that this also becomes one of the highlights of my year is we have not a dedicated channel, but a thread pops up on the Discord every year, which is all of us sort of just talking about the puzzle every single day. And there's like, maybe between 5 and 10 people there just talking about every day of the puzzle. So it's just like, it's a fun thing to do communally as well. Even if you're just solving the puzzles on your own, talking about them with other people afterwards is always something I appreciate. Okay, my 18th favorite game of all time is Taj Mahal. This used to be my favorite Knizia game. It is now the third Knizia game on my list. This is an excellent auction game. The thing I particularly love about Taj Mahal is the fact that you kind of see all of the auctions laid out on a map at the start and you sort of plan your route through what is effectively the entire game. Like, you can look at auction 12 and be like, okay, I know I need to build up my card supply in order to be able to like win this because it's vital to the strategy I'm sort of planning for. But like most things, you sort of get to auction 7 and you realize that things haven't quite gone exactly as you planned and you need to start pivoting to like other routes and other options. It is also a very brutal, harsh game. It was very interesting playing Ego, which is a version of Beowulf earlier this year, and kind of seeing a lot of the things I really like about Taj Mahal, like kind of condensed into kind of a slightly more accessible package. But I still think this is one case where I prefer specifically what Taj Mahal is offering, because there's just a fair bit more strategy to the planning out of how those auctions are going to unfold, which is quite a big divergence from the, I'm going to say generously, the layers of that Ego layers on top of that system.
Whoa, that is generous. Ego is great, but that's
Ego is great, but like it is also like top deck the game a lot of times.
Yeah.
But so Taj Mahal kind of compartmentalizes that into a little bit more of a pure hand management auction game, which I just really, really enjoy. Admittedly, I haven't played this one in a little while. I would love to revisit, especially on the back of having played Ego and being reminded of how much I appreciate what Reiner does with this space.
A game that I absolutely appreciate. I can see how so many people love it, but it absolutely pays the I'm not good at it tax, and that's why it is not higher on my list, because I cannot get this game, like in terms of like doing well at it. I see everything that Neilan is talking about, like just like, okay, auction number 11, I need to win it, but for some reason, just like the spanner gets in the works early and often for me in Taj Mahal. I can never quite get things to work out, so I just continually get rocked whenever I play it.
It also has that thing which you're alluding to, which is you will just get messed up by someone being more stubborn than you in the game, and you just get into those brilliant showdowns where you're like, okay, come on, Mark, you got to just get like, this is not worth it for you, man. Like, let me take
both of us down. Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly. That's Taj Mahal. That is great. That is at 18. My 17th favorite game is down 4 spots. This is Cthulhu Wars. This is my favorite Troops in the Map game. I fear that this will continue to slip down just by virtue of the fact that it is a hard game to get to the table. I have not played this in some time, but I think that there is very little that Cthulhu Wars does wrong in this space. If what you want from your Troops on the Map game, which is what I want from them, is games that feel very dynamic, both within the course of the game and from game to game to game. Like, the asymmetry is sort of off the charts here, and you can, similar to what I was saying about Kemet, you can build your faction in a bunch of different ways. You marry that with a game that just feels big and splashy, where you're throwing a lot of dice, and Cthulhu Wars just creates like an experience that is both intensely strategic and tactical and just big and dumb all at the same time.
It does everything right, unless you want to like the designer and publisher of your game.
Right. Sure. Yeah. I think the less said about that, the better, I suppose. But that is a huge bummer and continues to be a huge bummer. But it's unfortunate. But Cthulhu Wars, it's a game that is incredibly excellent at what it's trying to do. And if big, dumb, splashy Troops on the Map games are a flavor that you're looking for, then there are very few that do it better than this. My 16th favorite game of all time is Tzolk'in, the Mayan Calendar, down 4 spots. You'll see like a lot of things on this chunk of the list just kind of slipping down, kind of mostly because of other things moving above them, which kind of feels like an obvious thing to say, but it's more of a function of like stuff I haven't played in a while. Tzolk'in is a great example of that. This used to be one of my absolute favorite strategy games. It, obviously still is, but it's just one that I found myself returning to less and less and less. This is a game where forward planning is everything. You have this giant wheel, which is the centerpiece of the board. You're placing your workers out. You're watching them ride around the wheel until you take them off at the appropriate action. Those actions getting more and more powerful the longer your workers sit on the wheel. So it is kind of this very intense amount of like, okay, I'm going to put my worker on here. I know I'm going to take it off 3 turns from now. In the meantime, I have to put my next worker on the next turn, take that one off 2 turns from now. Like, you have to be planning all of that stuff out to do really, really well at Tzolk'in in a way that can be very, very daunting, but very rewarding when you pull it off. One of the things I sort of always liked about Tzolk'in in my early plays of it especially was kind of that feeling that every wheel had sort of distinct advantages and distinct mechanisms that you could engage with. I think that in the long term of time, some of those wheels have turned out to be more core to the metagame than others in a way that kind of sort of has lowered my appreciation of the game in the long term. It is sometimes frustrating playing this game with people that know it very, very well and just watching them play out the same well-known big strategies to perfection when you just want to be messing with the wheels. So that's one of those things that's kind of just a function of more the player space than the game itself, although it could be argued that there are maybe some balance issues there. But really appreciate what Tzolk'in does. It's an interesting game that I'm surprised that no one has used that mechanic in other ways. Like, honestly, I would just say lift the wheel and do more games that use that mechanic.
Take the wheel.
Take the wheel.
Publishers take the wheel. That's what Neilan says.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's a non-religious comment from Neilan.
I know this game is available on BGA. I wonder if the min-maxing that you're referring to, like people knowing specific strategies, makes it like less appealing to play on BGA because people.
That's exactly what happened with me, because the most recent times I've played it has been on BGA, and it's been this exercise in frustration of just being like, well, that's not fun. Like, play the game fun, you idiots.
There are some house rules for this around like how much of a resource you can sell. I think it's corn. I haven't played this that many times. I really, really like this game and think it's just like an excellent Euro where it's like all game and no fat. Like there's just nothing else going on. It's like, oof, it's very good.
Yeah. My 15th favorite game is down 5 spots. This used to be my favorite game of all time. This is The Resistance Avalon, or The Resistance. The reason I say Avalon is I think the version of the game where you have a Merlin character or the commander, I think is what it is in the dystopian game. Someone that sort of knows who some of the spies are, and then the spies have this added meta layer of, at the end of the game, if they know who Merlin is, then they win the game, stealing it from the Resistance. I adore the Resistance. The thing I've said repeatedly over and over again is that it is almost just social deduction distilled down to its purest form. There will still never be a day I ever turn down a game over the Resistance, but this is just one that I've sort of returned to less as other social deduction games have sort of come to the forefront. It is still one that actually I play to date practically every week in the form of an online version I sort of have played frequently with people since for the last 10 years at this point.
You're still doing that?
I'm still doing it. Like those games have
That's
actually...
funny.
I know they've slowed to a crawl because I think people are just petering out of that slack over the long course of time and checking in less and less. But it's still happening. Sometimes it's a rate of like, okay, we are getting a mission done like every 3 or 4 days.
Sure.
But it's still just been this recurring, persistent like event in my life is playing my online Resistance.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And so what about though, Neilan, like, you know, because other social deduction games are $200 and require X amount of people and time.
Yeah.
So, like, someone says, Neilan, we want to play a social deduction game. There's 5, 6, 7, 8 of us. Are you still playing the Resistance in that slot, or what are you? Because you can't Blood on the Clock Tower all the time, right?
No,
like, it's too big. It's too much. So, Are you Werewords in that spot? Are you pushing out Avalon? Just curious where your head is at right now. I love Resistance. Like, this is so far and away one of my favorite games ever. I'm just curious where your head is at.
I think more often than not, Werewords has been the answer to that. But that's also like in such a different space because that is, I would say, skews closer to Resistance is a party game. But that skews closer to what I think of as a party game, does Werewords. The Resistance is a game that I kind of feel like I always have on me. Like if I'm going to some sort of event where I know games will be, I will usually take my box of the Resistance with. But it's also a game that I think a lot of people now have a familiarity with or have played similar versions of. And it's one that I sort of find hard to like say, like, this is the one that we should be playing. And to be clear, Clock Tower is not coming out in events like that. But I still find it hard to get Resistance played in those contexts. And I think it's just a function of the fact that a lot of people have played it. It's, you know, it's an older game. There are other more contemporary games that usually people are more keen to play. But Resistance is still going to be the one. If it's not Clock Tower, then the Resistance is going to be the one that I want to be playing personally. But yeah, still an incredible game. Yeah. Number 14 on my list is Patchwork. This is a Uwe Rosenberg polyomino game, a 2-player game. I adore this. I played a lot of this on Board Game Arena, and it's a good example of the thing that sort of Mark has mentioned multiple times of just a game really, really elevating by having played a lot of it on Board Game Arena. The intensity to which the economic puzzle of it, like, you know, that's maybe putting it a little bit strongly, but like the trade-off between spending time in order to get buttons and using buttons versus spending them while intermixed with like what is effectively a polyomino placement game is just something that just sort of like tickles my brain in exactly the right ways. And you can be really, really, really good at Patchwork, it turns out. And I think sort of like playing it a bunch of times with the same players repeatedly has kind of elevated the games I played it to like such a new level that I've really, really enjoy this. While it still remains a incredibly accessible game that I would recommend to almost anyone, especially if you have like a non-gaming partner, it is hard to resist the charm of the physical version of Patchwork and the simplicity of it. Also, Time Tracks.
Time Tracks, yeah, exactly.
An unholy alliance.
Here we go. I always enjoyed Patchwork, but I sort of thought of it as a, not trivial, but, you know, sort of a light game, and enjoyed it, but never really sought it out. But as you mentioned, like, getting a chance to deep dive on it last year on BGA increased my appreciation for it, like, tremendously, and got really deep down the rabbit hole of Patchwork for a couple months there. So, yeah, absolutely love it. Time Tracks.
At number...
Time Tracks.
At number 13, this is up 7 spots. This is one Mark spoke about last week. Double crossover. This is Ra. Second favorite Rhino Knizia game. Yeah, Ra is excellent. Ra kind of marries a lot of the stuff that I've already spoken about, which is like auction games, very accessible. It's not trivial to teach, I would say, but like it still just has a sort of a very easy appeal, especially in the new deluxeified version. Unfortunate, but I do think that is a really good way to sell someone on Ra, is just giving them chunky tiles to play with. But I think the core of the game is just incredibly, incredibly solid. Like the base mechanic of when are you going to give up your specific auction disc, which you can see at all points in times. You can see the auction discs every player has. So you know what you're up against, who can outbid you, what they want by looking at their tableau. So everything is always very open, and it is a game that is very specifically about playing the game of what do other people want and how much do they want it more than I do. Everything is very transparent. Everything is kind of very easy, quote unquote, but it sort of belies like a lot of very clever playing other players and sort of interacting in the purest form. This is my favorite auction game. It is a really excellent game that I've come to appreciate so much, and it really bums me out actually that I didn't discover Ra sooner. Like in the early days of the podcast, I feel like one of the most frequent comments was people telling me that I had to play Ra. And I hate that I waited until this newer version to like really sink my teeth into it, but it is as advertised a truly excellent auction game. My 12th favorite game is another double crossover with Mark. This is up 6 spots. This is Stationfall. The thing that I've come to appreciate about Stationfall is something that I really love in this type of game where you have asymmetries and very, very deep asymmetries. Like the characters in Stationfall, the way that their objectives work and their capabilities is so different from one another that every single game of Stationfall, the intermixing of those characters brings such a unique space to the game. There are some characters that are just so crazy wild, like things like the psychic rat that is like treated like an object and can be carried by other players. Like there are just like so many crazy off the wall interactions that like a average game of Stationfall introduces that you've just never seen someone do before until that specific combination of characters like shows up in your game. And it always feels clever, it always feels inventive, it always feels like you're doing something that's never been done before because of the way that these interactions play off of each other. And it always leads to, like I said last episode, just really fun stories. Like it is the emergence of just great little micro stories that play out in this very kind of somewhat constrained but also incredibly sandboxy space where every single player's objective is sort of at odds with yours, and the way that they will sort of mess up your story enhances your story and sort of ends up creating like this really insane mix of events every single game.
I absolutely obviously love Stationfall, given how high I had it on my list. One thing that has always been daunting to me is teaching it, because I always feel like I've only taught it I think once or twice and I've found it difficult, but you are the Stationfall master teacher. I feel like you've taught it quite a few times, right, over the last couple of years at conventions?
Yeah, I sort of it's become one of the games that I sort of like love to take to conventions and teach. Yeah. There's always a contingent of people in the Discord that are like hungry to play it, so it's one that I have like taught more often than not at a convention.
How have you found teaching it now that you've done it a number of times? Has it gotten easier? Or do you still find it cumbersome?
No, look, both. It's definitely gotten easier, but it is still an incredibly cumbersome game. I don't think that there's any way to escape that it is an hour-long teach, however good you are at teaching it. There's just so much to have to explain. And, that alone could easily disqualify it from anyone's list. Like the fact that it is that sort of daunting to sort of introduce new players to, you would certainly consider that a knock against it. But I think that the thing that I've always found consistently by teaching it is that although there's a lot to it, the way that the theme kind of makes a lot of those things kind of feel sort of obvious, quote unquote, is incredible. Because like the actions, while there are a lot of them, are sort of generally quite simple. It's like move and pick up and attack and do this. Right. And then every room just explains what its action is on it. Like you do have to do a whole upfront teach of going through what every character can do and what every single room on the board can do, because all of that might become relevant in any given game. But I kind of feel like once people are in it, it kind of just...
I find this game to just be on the losing side of game roleplay activity where everyone has to pretend that they're playing Pax Porfiriana, but they're actually like in a school play together, pretending to be on a space mission. And I have had good games of it and I enjoyed it, so it's not a knock, but it is this weird one where you have to have a lot of rules internalized, you have to be playing to win, and then you still are getting scumbagged a lot, and then what you take away from it is the stories we learned along the way. And so that's like a weird mix. It's a fun mix, but you have to be in for that, which is its own thing.
And just like you said, like it's a good example of a game where I will allow myself to be hypocritical, because I've had similar things against stuff like Cole Worley games, like, like things like John Company, where the game can fall apart at a moment's notice, but that's in service of what the game is trying to do. For whatever reason, rubbed me the wrong way in John Company, but really worked for me in Stationfall. I think that Stationfall kind of just presents much sillier to some extent, and like you kind of almost go in with that being the expectation. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a game where you sort of can be playing for 2 hours and then someone does something completely arbitrarily that just messes up your entire game. And that's something you just have to be okay with. But usually it's in the service of it being a fun moment, even if it's not exactly what you had planned. My 11th favorite game is up 3 spots. This is the highest Reiner Knizia on my list. This is Blue Lagoon. Was happy to have Mark mention it last episode. Always happy to wax lyrical about what I love about Blue Lagoon. That specific thing that I spoke about last week about being ready to pounce on every action that you need to take, like Mark had mentioned, like mapping out the things you need to accomplish with the pieces you have left, and trying to hinge every single move around what you're trying to accomplish while other people are creeping up on your plans and being ready to pounce and take the things at the expense of other things that you have to give up. It is not as conceptually simple as something like Through the Desert in that you have these multiple scoring objectives that are competing with each other, but I do think that those are the things I like about it, is the factoring in of all the different opportunities you can score, trying to factor in the ones that are going to work out for you this game, the ones you sort of have to give up as the game progresses, and doing that in a very highly interactive environment that's about blocking people's routes and paying attention to what they're paying attention to, and so trying to circumvent them while also trying to get what you're trying to get done by the end of the game. And it doesn't hurt that this is just such a great looker as well. Bright, vibrant colors, looks really great, very easy to teach. There are very few games I'm as excited to show people regardless of their level of skill with board games. This is not something I would show to someone that is like brand new to board games necessarily, but it's right on the cusp. Really great game. Really adore Blue Lagoon.
I hadn't thought about that before, you mentioning that the different ways of scoring is something you appreciate. And I think that is like so crucial to why I like Blue Lagoon so much, is because if it was cleaner, if there was only like one way to score, if it was like more, to use a phrase I use a lot when talking about Blue Lagoon, more Go-esque, where it's like, okay, this is the way to score, it would make things a little more clear. It would make scoring a little too plain, I think. And the fact that that's obfuscated makes for more of like an open decision space and gives you more like, okay, this part is being cut off, this avenue is being cut off, let me try scoring this other way. So yeah, I haven't thought about that, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, because it kind of does both things a little bit, right? Where you sort of see the layout, because the board gets randomly seeded with resources, right? So you look at what's out there and think like, okay, I can see a good route that's going to get me things I want. But obviously you get interrupted and blocked by other players. So it does rely a little bit on like, okay, this is my plan and this is how I have to pivot like as things progress. I think it just marries both of those things really, really well. That was my list for the week, my number 30 to 11. Join us next week as we get into the top 10 of our favorite games of all time.
It's a big one.
Thank you all for listening. Thank you to Heart Society for our intro and outro music. What's in your mind, kid? Please sound off in our Discord. I would love to hear what you think about the picks on my list. I would like to argue with you about why you're wrong and why you feel like you need to be an outliner to the great community taste that I am building for our great hobby. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.